In our last lecture, I mentioned that we're going to be turning our attention, starting from chapter 9, to the evidence for human evolution in the fossil record, which will be explained a little more in depth in chapter 8. Fossils are really just the impressions of what bones were once like. The bone material is no longer there. There's no more organic traces. You can't really analyze them as bones. You can only analyze them as what they looked like when they were bones. They're casts, in a way. They're mineralized, fossilized, formerly organic material. So that limits what we can get from the past, and it's important that we acknowledge the limitations of our knowledge. We have a clear way to date the forms of life in the past, but we have to interpret what those mean based on how anatomy fits together and what those anatomical features tell us about past behaviors. It's also important to remember that when you're looking at a fossil, you're going to have to sort of close your eyes and imagine what the once living creature whose fossils that represents, how they behaved in life. Because if you remember what our lessons on evolution, what we're talking about is a relationship between a living organism and their environment. That's really what natural selection is. Can you survive in that environment? And do you pass your genes on to the next generation? That's really the crux of what evolution is. So we have to do a couple of things when we come to look at the fossil record. We have to understand what the environment was. What were the pressures that were taking place? And what was the behavior of a living creature in that environment? Now, we can't go back in time to observe living ancestors when they were alive. That's not possible. We don't have a time machine. But the good thing is that there are relatives of ours, even distant ones, but there are relatives of ours that have features that we share with them, and we can see how different environments generate different types of adaptations. So we talked a little bit about things like teeth. Teeth are sensitive indicators of what kind of a diet you have. We don't have shark's teeth because we don't have a shark's diet. We don't have cow's teeth because we don't have cow's diet. We have teeth that are adapted to a particular type of feeding and certain types of food. We need to be able to turn our attention to other creatures that have similar types of teeth and look at how they use them in their natural habitat, in their environment. That can give us sort of a window into accessing what our ancestors might have looked like. Now, it's important to remember that any living creature today is as evolved as you and I are. Evolution has not produced us as better than a chimpanzee or better than a lemur. We're not better than these other creatures. You're not better than a cockroach. Cockroaches are extremely well adapted to a range of environments. They're survivors. They're successful. In terms of evolution, they're really well adapted. You are too, but in a different way. And so what we need to do is look at our closest living relatives and see the similarities that we share with them, and that will give us an indication as to why our ancestors acquired these characteristics for survival and why those are passed on to you today. So it requires asking some basic questions. I've mentioned these before, like for instance, why are our eyes forward facing? Why do both of our eyes face forward? Why aren't they on the side of our heads like a deer or a cow? That would give us full range of vision all around us. We could keep our eyes out for predators. Do we have our forward-facing eyes because we're like a cheetah and we're hunting down prey? Well, I don't know about you, but I would really struggle to try and chase down any prey on my own with just my feet and my hands. So that seems unlikely. But there are other creatures that are herbivores, ones that only subsist on vegetarian diets, like gorillas that also have forward-facing eyes, and other ones that are more omnivorous, that they're just opportunists and then eat whatever they want. Now, this group of creatures that is in the same order of us. Remember, kings play cards on fat green stools. The on mnemonic is order. And so a little bit about halfway up that taxonomic scale is the classification order. And the order primates refers to the group the order that we are in. And we share that with a range of creatures that we're going to talk about today. And we'll look at the range that exists on Earth, living creatures, see their adaptations, and this will give us some clues when we start to look at the history, I should say, the evolutionary history of our lineage. And we'll see that all of these living creatures are just as evolved as you and I are, but they're evolved in different environments. And so when you see a feature that relates to us in our past, you can say, okay, that is the reason why we had those adaptations. Color vision, forward-facing eyes. We've got limbs that move like this. Why is that? We can grasp things with our hands. We're not the only ones that have precision grip. So where do these adaptations come from? And ultimately we want to ask the question of those 6 steps of humanness. We'll come to those later on, and we'll see that when we hit the fossil record. And those 6 stages of humanness in chronological order are bipedalism. We walk on 2 feet. We have non-honing canines, which is unlike our ape cousins. We don't have big fangs in the front of our mouth that get sharpened in a diastema, a little slot in our lower teeth that sharpens them. We also make and use tools more than other creatures, but we're not the only ones that make and use tools. We also have we cooperate and hunt. We're also not the only creatures that cooperate when we hunt, but in terms of primates, we're one of the few that do. And then also being able to cooperate and coordinate, pass down tool usage, it helps to have some sort of communication, and we speak and use language. And then finally, the last stage that really separates us from other primates is we figured out how to manipulate the environment to change it to what we found more suitable. That is to say, we domesticated plants and animals and started living in one place and building an environment around us, an artificial environment, and applying artificial selection techniques. All of these things we're going to come to in the future, but these are the sorts of things that you want to keep your eye out for in the fossil record, but we also want to know what our starting point was. When these adaptations started to take place, like standing upright, what was the creature that lived before us that wasn't standing upright? How did this come about? What was the baseline? Where were we coming from? So looking at the other living primates gives us a good starting point to think about our past. Remember that these are not our past, though. So it's an imperfect model to look at, but it's the best we can do right now. So it draws these relationships between physical adaptations and the environments in which they are found. So primates, the order primates, are a large category. There's over 200 different species of primates that exist in the world, and you are one of them. I want to make this very clear. Don't say humans as opposed to primates. You are a primate. So is a monkey. So is a lemur. All of these things are primates. We're different species because order goes down to finally genus and species, but it converges at that order. So a lot of different species, 200 of them or more, can be headed under the order primate. You are a primate. And all primates share some common features. And in fact, that's the reason why we have categorized them that way. And now that we have genetics, we can actually test the genetic relationships, and it verifies some of the things that we were that we were assuming in the past before we had genetics to look at, based on morphology, the forms of body types and that sort of thing. Anatomists, biologists did a very good job of categorizing creatures, but there were some tweaks that needed to be made to these models of taxonomy that we are correcting through genetics. But by and large, genetics have verified these relationships that we were able to establish just by form alone. This one looks this way, this one looks this way. They're probably related back here in time at some point. And our genetics are helping us to understand that. Some of the things that are uniform about primates are that, first of all, they're found in the tropics. And so primates generally live in warm environments, especially in warm forested environments. And I'm going to give you a vocabulary term here: arboreal. There's even a holiday called Arbor Day, which is about trees. And so if you know Arbor Day and you know that it's about celebrating planting trees and things, that will help you to remember. Arboreal adaptations are ones that are developed, they're physical features that are developed for living in a forest and living in trees. So a horse, for instance, you're not going to find a horse in a tree, right? It's not an arboreal mammal. Can a horse go into a forest? Sure, fine. You'll find a horse hiding out in a forest from time to time. You can ride it through a forest. But you're not going to see a horse up in a tree. They don't have the physiology for it. They can't grasp things. They have one big toe that is their hoof. Their limbs don't go above their, you don't have a rotating arm that goes around that you can grab things. They don't have hands. They're quadrupedal. They're huge too. They crush branches. So that is not an arboreal mammal. But all primates are adapted for life in the trees. And we share that with them as well. Our ancestors, going back some way, and we'll see how when our human ancestors started to lose some of these adaptations for living in trees, but that was our baseline. That's where we came from, was as a primate, we have an arboreal history. Also, primates have dietary plasticity. That is to say, a deer is not going to go out and hunt down a rabbit and eat it. That's not possible for a deer. They won't do it. They can't do it. They can't digest it. That's not going to be possible for a herbivore like that, a ruminant, in fact. Primates are more plastic, they're more malleable, they're more opportunistic, and a lot of, especially forms of primates that resemble early forms of mammals, like we'll see in a video that I'll show you, the capuchin monkeys from South America are very similar in form to some of the earliest primates that existed, and they eat anything. They're just walk around looking for stuff, turning over rocks and leaves and finding stuff to eat, whether that's a clam that they've got to figure out how to open, or little insects in a tree, or fruit, or berries, or even leaves. Anything that they can come across that has nutrition, they're able to digest and eat a wide range of foods. So dietary plasticity is another thing. Also, primates tend to be pretty clever. And to do that, you've got to have a fairly good brain. Primates are pretty smart. And they, to succeed as a primate, especially with a big brain, you tend to live in larger, with the bigger the brain, the larger the primate group that you live in. And that requires you to have a bit of sociality. You need to be socialized in your group if you're going to succeed in that group, and you're going to find a mate that you can successfully have offspring with. And so parental investment is very common with primates. If a snake, for instance, will guard their eggs in their nest, but once they hatch, those little baby snakes are on their own, right? There's no parental investment from the parents of baby snakes towards their babies. But primates have a great deal of parental investment. That means that, first of all, baby primates tend to be pretty helpless, which means there's a burden on the at least the mother, but often the parents or the group. And this produces more socialized creatures that are more successful in primate communities. So we're going to look at a whole range of primates, but I want to dispel one myth about this that I get pretty often from people, and I don't know exactly where this idea comes from. All primates have an ability to grasp, right? All primates have thumbs. All primates have adaptations in the way that they grasp. And so don't think for a moment that humans' opposable thumbs are all that special. Look at a chimpanzee or a gorilla. They can pick stuff up. They've got hands too. In fact, they've got feet that can pick stuff up. You try picking up an apple and eating it with your foot. We can't do that because we have differently adapted feet specialized for walking upright. That being said, we do have quite a long thumb. Humans have longer thumbs that give us a little bit more opposability than most other primates, meaning that we have a very fine precision grip. But a gorilla can also pick things up as well, and lots of monkeys and apes and other, even lemurs, can pick things up with their hands. Even non-primates, an otter can pick things up and do stuff with their hands. So opposable thumbs are not all that special. Now, that being said, because we have them, and because we've got big brains, we can do stuff with that combination of characteristics. So, but for instance, our tool use, if we had different hands, we would make different tools. Our tools fit into our hands because we made them. And so don't be surprised if you see a chimpanzee pick up a human tool and they look kind of awkward with it, because they didn't make them. They didn't make them for themselves. We made them for ourselves, not for them. So if they were making a tool, they would make a different tool that would fit into their hand better. But we do share a lot of characteristics with other primates. Our skeletal structure is really similar to other primates. We have the same number and kind of vertebrae in our back. But the configuration of how they're put together is slightly different, because in, let's say, a monkey that walks across, that has four equal length limbs, their hind legs and their forelegs, and they've got grasping hands and grasping feet, and they walk across the top of a tree limb. They're quadrupedal. They have four legs, and that means that their normal posture is horizontal. And for that, they're taking the weight of gravity, and so it helps to have a sort of C-shaped spine. Because the pressure, if they jump off of a branch onto the ground, they're going to be taking pressure, and that C-shaped spine absorbs some of that impact. So you don't break your back if you jump off of a limb. So quadrupeds, like monkeys, have a C-shaped spine that shows their posture. Now, we don't have a C-shaped spine because we are specially adapted. Those same vertebrae are adapted for walking upright. But if we had just a straight snake-like back, imagine jumping off like just a a curb, you could break your back, just snap it, because there'd be enough pressure from, you've got a pretty heavy head, and you could actually exert a lot of pressure on your spine. So what adaptations and evolution has done for us is that as we evolved bipedalism, our spines adapted for an increasingly heavy head and that posture of upright standing. Now, if you want to have a little shock absorption in an upright posture to jump off of a little curb, then what you have is an S-shaped curve. But the base of the spine and the top of the spine that connects to your head are right over one another. They're in direct alignment, but you've got a curve in between that acts as a shock absorber for that impact. We also, as I said, we have feet that look very much like hands, but ours are specially adapted for that upright posture. And the fact that you don't find a specially adapted foot in, let's say, a chimpanzee is because they still live a lot of their lives in trees. And so it helps to have grasping feet for that type of environment that they live in. They have not gone in the direction of walking on 2 feet. So their spines look different and their feet look different because of that. All mammals tend to have an enhanced sense of touch. And your fingernails on your hand are you don't have claws, and you don't have talons or anything like that, because that's not how we find food. We don't claw things or rip them to shreds with our hands. What we do use our hands for is to feel around for stuff, and you need to be a little bit careful in nature sticking your hands in things, but it helps to have a strong sense of touch. And so your fingernails actually are covering and protecting an extremely sensitive part of your skin. And the fingernails are there to protect it so you don't harm that sensitive area, but it also allows underneath that to be able to feel around and make judgments based on that. We also have dermal ridges, which enhance that sense of touch. We also rely heavily on our vision. We're very visual. Primates are a very visual group of animals. And you can tell this by how much evolution has invested in protecting a particular organ like an eye. Something like a raccoon has a very strong sense of smell. They have a snout that has a huge sinus cavity